What's up, y'all? Garrett Sandler with you, getting ready for the Rangers and the Angels. It's the first game of a 3-game series and the final 3 games of a 9-game homestand, a 3-team homestand here in Arlington. I wanted to chat with you about some Rangers things. Have been getting a lot of questions, and so wanted to answer 3 questions I've been getting a lot of. So let's start with the concern with Marcus Semien. A lot of people have asked about this. I lean patient just in general. If you've listened to me before, you've heard me, really preach patience and sample size and stuff like that, and leaning on track record when track record exists. When track record doesn't exist, then perhaps the ground's a little shakier. But with Marcus Semien, here's what we know. He has not gotten off to a good start. There's no disputing that. And it's 32 games. It's 127 at bats that he can't get back. Like, he has banked, these games and these at bats. Now it's a 6th of the season, more or less, somewhere between a 5th and a 6th of the season. That means that there's still a lot of baseball left for those numbers to progress to the mean. Is Marcus Semien going to, just go on an absolute tear and have a 40 to 45 home run season? At this point, probably not. To have a 45 home run season in Major League Baseball, to have a drought like this is tough to overcome. But I don't think it means that at the end of the year, we're not going to look back at Marcus Semien's season and say, hey, no, he did well. I think that the chances are that perhaps next year, in which he, hopefully doesn't have a 30-plus game dry spell to begin the season, ends up being a better year. So I guess I say that to say this. Just because Marcus Semien is something in this season doesn't mean he can't get better or improve upon it in the following season. I think there are a lot of pressures and a lot of elements and factors that come into play for guys, position players, who switch teams with a big contract attached to that transaction. There's a track record here recently of guys like Mookie Betts and Manny Machado and Francisco Lindor who go to a new team with a big deal, or in the case of Mookie Betts, is a big trade. And it's not that they necessarily have bad years, but the year that they put together, and Bryce Harper was the same way with Philadelphia, it's not up to the standard that they had set. And for these guys, usually if it's a big deal, it's a pretty high standard. There are a lot of reasons as to why that might be the case. Some might apply to Marcus Semien, others might not. I know one concern is always that a player gets paid and they kick their feet up. I can tell you that is not at all an issue or concern with Marcus Semien. If anything, it is on the other end of the spectrum. It's, hey, I got paid. I got to now, work extra hard to prove that I'm worth it. And when you get off to a slow start, sometimes you press. Looking at some of the numbers, the things that stand out, just without bogging you down with the data, it seems like Marcus Semien, who has typically been a very patient hitter on the first pitch, has been more aggressive first pitch, maybe isn't swinging at the best pitches on 0-0. He has in general been a guy who has absolutely hunted fastballs and damaged the crap out of fastballs. But it seems like this year he's swinging at more breaking balls. Not that you can just totally avoid swinging at breaking balls, and some guys are really good breaking ball hitters. But, his strength has always been identifying breaking balls and forcing pitchers to throw those pitches for strikes, and then sitting back and getting his fastball and driving it. The success against fastballs hasn't quite been there, and it seems like the chase has been there. I get the sense he's pressing. I get the sense that, he knows he was signed to a 7-year deal, big money, wanting to show that he's worth it. He's gotten off to a slow start, coming off a career year, and is, if anything, is trying too hard to try and make something happen with every swing. I'm not concerned about Marcus Semien and the work ethic, and I'm very curious to see where the conversation exists a month, 2 months, 3 months from now. At the end of the day, for a team that is looking towards the future, you'd love to, at the end of the season, look at the back of Marcus Semien's baseball card and say, yeah, these numbers are comparable to what he's done in the past. But it's also important to note that I think what's most important is that he just refines that guy, and that going into the offseason, we have a significant sample size where it's like, yeah, no, Marcus Semien's back to Marcus Semien. Like, let's just say hypothetical, it takes him another 2 months and he's roughing it, right? He's having a tough time. But then we get to July 1, and from July 1 through the rest of the year, Marcus Semien's playing at an elite level like he did last year. Well, his season total numbers might not reflect it, but it would be encouraging to know that, hey, not just for a week and not just for a month, but for a considerable amount of time, we saw this guy. And going into next year, which the Rangers, plan to be even more competitive, you feel confident that you've got that guy. And I'm still not at a point where I'm wavering that, that's going to be something we'll be able to witness this year. All right. Been asked about Martin Perez a lot. And there are a lot of factors with Martin Perez. Let's start with some of the objective stuff. Over his career, he struggled against righties. And, when you consider that there are more right-handed hitters in a lineup than lefties, that's a challenge. It's a challenge for a lot of left-handed pitchers. If they can't get righties out, sometimes that basically renders them a relief pitcher. It's tough to be a starting pitcher if you have a tough time against righties. And Martin Perez in his career has had a tough time against righties. This year, that hasn't been the case. This year, he's been really good against righties. And I think the cutter, which was a pitch that he didn't have when he was with Texas, he got it, I think, that first year away from Texas when he was with the Minnesota Twins. That pitch has been very effective against righties. And the changeup, which is a pitch that he did have with the Rangers, but perhaps is a pitch upon which he's improved, has been very important as well. Yesterday, in his start against Boston, righties were 2 for 17. Overall, on the season, righties are hitting 185 against him, and not with a lot of power either. An OPS of 520. You go back to his career entering this year, righties had a combined average of 296 with an OPS of 821. And it's not like, okay, well, yeah, if you're combining, career numbers, what about last year? Was he showing signs last year? Well, we weren't watching him every time he took the mound, but based on the numbers, no. Righties hit 308 against him last year with an OPS of around 900. So, is this sustainable? I guess we'll wait and see. But, the reality is the numbers right now are showing that Martin Perez against righties has been really good. And it's because of the cutter and the changeup, which, those things kind of add up. Now, he's got to continue to execute those pitches. And as, a new chapter in the Martin Perez scouting report book is developed, he's got to, continue to be prepared to make adjustments or, deal with the counter punches that teams will have ready for him. The other side of it is up here. It's the mental side. Martin appears to be a much more mature pitcher than he was first time with the Rangers. He's talked about how his time away from Texas has given him a perspective that he maybe didn't have while he was pitching with the Rangers in terms of just letting things go and staying, focused on the mound and not letting little things get to him, which was a common refrain when he was with the Rangers first time around. He also made a comment to me that makes me feel like if I were to read between the lines, when Martin Perez was with the Rangers first time around, he came up as a big time prospect and, certainly showed flashes early on of living up to that quote unquote hype. He then had Tommy John, came back and was constantly pitching against the opposition and against the hype of being a big time prospect and was always measured against that. I think, he measured himself against that. And when he left Texas, the Minnesota Twins didn't really have that context. If you were a big time baseball fan, maybe you were familiar, but when he went to the Twins, he was just a veteran pitcher who was changing teams. And he got a pitch with the Twins and the Red Sox. And not that he was like, dominant with these teams or anything. You look at his numbers, they weren't far from his career numbers. As a matter of fact, in some cases, they might have been worse, but he was freed up from the weight and expectation of being a one-time prospect. And now he comes back to Texas, as a 31-year-old pitcher who he's not a prospect. He is who he is. And maybe he still is going to get better. And so far this year, he's shown that. But I just think that there's a freeness in Martin that comes with being detached from that expectation. The last question I've been asked about is the team's defense. The infield defense has gone off to a slow start. Nathaniel Lowe's had a rough time at first, continuing to work hard to get better around the bag. I think some of that stuff is it's footwork. It's using the full frame that you have to stretch and receive the ball as quickly as possible. Obviously, balls in the dirt around the bag, that's important too. It's not all on him though. The other infielders have not had a great start either. And I would say that the guy who has had the best start is Andy Ibanez. And that's a little bit of a surprise, right? Because the MO for Andy previously was that he was a hitter and couldn't field. Well, he's looked pretty sharp. He is a much improved defensive player. What stood out to me though defensively is that this team is very strong in the outfield. Whether it's Adolis Garcia or Eli White in center field, those are 2+ center fielders. And in some cases, especially recently, they've both been in the outfield. So whether it's Eli in center and Adolis in right, or Adolis in center and Eli in left, you've got 2 center fielders in your outfield. When Adolis is in center and Eli's in left, it typically means Cole Calhoun is in right field. And that trio is the best outfield trio the Rangers have defensively. Cole Calhoun is a former Gold Glove winner in right field. He's still a very good right fielder and has a great arm. And when it's Eli in center, Adolis in right, that means that Brad Miller's in left, and Brad's not really in there for his glove. Not a bad athlete though. And Nick Solak's played a little left field too. But it helps when you've got Eli or Adolis in center next to them. And then again, when it's Eli in left, Adolis in center, and Calhoun in right, that's a pretty dynamic outfield. So in the outfield, the Rangers defensively have looked really good. That's just a little bit, some of the questions I've been asked, just a little information there. Looking forward to talking to you more throughout the season.